Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. My name's Will Critchlow, founder and CEO at SearchPilot, and I'm joined this time by Brodie Clark. And I'm very excited for the conversation that we're about to have. I think in recent times, we've been talking quite a lot about really big picture stuff, future of AI search and the strategic implications of that. And Brodie, no doubt, has some opinions on that as well. But what I'm most excited to dig into is some more tactical, technical, detail-oriented things that folks like me, and hopefully like many of you, enjoy geeking out around SEO. So this is going to be around changes to the search results in the way they're displayed, changes to the way that rankings are done, that data is sourced, and not just Google, but the way that Google is kind of having their feet held to the fire a little, it feels like, by all the new entrants that are coming along. And Brodie's the perfect person to have this conversation with, because if you haven't been following his work, he's been absolutely prolific and breaking out everywhere recently, and is the leading expert that I've come across on all things e-commerce and product search related, and many other things as well. We'll probably get onto marketplaces and the like. But Brodie, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Will. Awesome to be here.
I thought we'd kick off by diving into a trend that has come up in previous conversations, but we haven't had a chance to kind of really dive deep into, which is this idea that Google is kind of trying to be a PLP. And we might use a lot of jargon. We should try and explain ourselves. What do I mean by that? PLP, product listing page. Folks who aren't in e-commerce, this is essentially category pages, right? So the page that lists all the things of a particular type. Think, green football boots page, for example. And what we're seeing these days is Google increasingly, especially in the US, and it's starting to roll out elsewhere, increasingly listing products and having filtering and sorting and all those kinds of things on the Google page, as opposed to sending you to a particular retailer or a particular brand's own PLP. So Brodie, you've written about this a lot, but why do you think this is happening? What is happening? Have I covered the right gist there?
Yeah, definitely. I think you've nailed it, that Google search results are feeling a bit like a PDP, in the sense that it feels like it's an arrangement on a website rather than a standard search result page. And like you mentioned, you've got the refinement section where it feels like faceted navigation on the side, and then you've got a whole list of product results. And like you mentioned, this has been around for a bit of time in the US, and it's only been more recently, say in the last year or so in Australia at least, that it's kind of rolled out to be a default feature. And the same in, say, like the UK and European region. So other areas have caught up a little bit more, but because I work with a lot of sites in the US, I've kind of been able to do a lot of testing in this area in the lead up and get some insights around this. And it's certainly a big opportunity for e-commerce stores, and kind of one that they can't really ignore, because there's a lot of instances where you get this product unit, this grid that shows at the very top of search results, and sometimes on mobile it can take up several scrolls, whereas previously you might have had the category page for a brand that was ranking. So it's kind of an area where you can't really ignore at this point in time.
Yeah. And so we had we hosted a dinner recently for some e-commerce folks, and we had a little quiz, kind of SEO pub quiz. And one of the questions was, when did the precursor to Google Shopping launch? I think it was called Frugal, right, originally.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of folks were shocked at the fact that it was the early 2000s. I now actually don't remember the exact date. I should have looked that up. But it's like, it's been around for a long time, right? 20 plus years at this point. And yet it feels like this trend is much newer. And so, the Google Shopping tab has been around for a long time. Why do you think we're seeing it in the regular search results more now?
Yeah, and I remember there was a point in time where the shopping tab was primarily just ads. I don't know if you remember back to then. That was probably more so in recent times, but now it's primarily the free listing results, and then you've got an ad unit at the top. But for the most for the most part, it is just filled with free listings. And it does replicate a lot of what you see in the main section of search results, because generally with every other tab in search, the main section is a culmination of everything else. So it kind of summarizes all the other sections. I think it comes about from Google wanting to give more visibility to the products themselves for a lot of these searches, instead of leaving it all to the user to explore the PLP category page to find what they need. So they segment it in a pretty interesting way. Some of my research has found that they do different types of grid results. The most prominent one, the one that I think most people refer to the grid results as, the popular products grid.
Yep.
That one shows quite often. Some of my research, when I teamed up with Nozzle, who allow you to do some really interesting rank tracking, was that the popular products grid or unit shows about 80% of the time for a particular product category. So that's pretty prominent for a lot of the queries that you would assume have commercial intent, and a user is trying to purchase a product. Then you've got these all these other types of grid results, like the deals grid in stores nearby for products that have local inventory feeds, fast shipping and delivery, more products. So there's all these other grids that show up at the same time, and they have specific requirements to show in there. So something like the popular products grid, you do need to meet some criteria, which is a bit hard to optimize for in the sense. You can set yourself up to have a chance to rank in there, but at the end of the day, you need to fit the categorization of being a popular product that users are seeking out.
There's some kind of interesting chicken and egg problem there, isn't there? Of you kind of need to be popular in order to be listed as popular, but you kind of need to be listed to get popular, which is a version of what we've kind of seen for a long time. But I think you go back far enough, and search was a big democratizer, right? You could be a tiny blog or whatever and compete with the biggest sites in the world. I think we've seen across a lot of areas, not just product search, that's becoming less true, and it really being a space for big brands to play. Obviously, that's where we have a lot of our experience, and I know you work with quite a range. It does interesting things as well when you think about the difference between bricks and mortar. You mentioned local, the kind of crossover with local here. So in-stock information, proximity information, as well as there's also the other segmentation of, I guess you'd call it like retailer versus brand. So, you have the kind of big multi-brand, what we'd have thought of as a department store, I guess, in the offline world, but they could be pure online retailers, versus an individual brand or manufacturer with their direct-to-consumer play. So there's quite a lot going on, isn't there? And quite a lot of complexity and different tactics and strategies depending on your business model and your positioning.
Yeah, definitely. And something interesting I've come across in, I guess, the last year or two is you get these grid results showing up for branded queries as well, which can really throw things out of whack. And you see this for really large stores where they might have their products being stocked in the likes of, say, Walmart, Best Buy, even like Amazon and eBay, where they are then losing their branded traffic because these grids show so prominently for these branded queries and for variations of branded queries that you do see click-through rate changes over time on a query that you'd expect, we've got some ownership over this and we should be getting this traffic either way, depending on how Google views the site. So that sort of insight is one that I feel like a lot of stores are a bit behind on as well. Because say if you even have a store where you might show up prominently for your brand name for, say, like a popular products type grid, and you're filling out a lot of the slots, and there's not a great deal more that you can do there. But if there's an in-stores nearby grid that shows up for a branded query, which I do see happening a lot, and it does vary based on the searcher's location, you can be losing a lot of traffic to those queries. And I do find that they do get clicked because in the little overlay of the grid result, it shows the user how far the store is away and if it's in stock and if they have the product. So that's kind of insights that sometimes there's not a great deal that you can do to counteract it because it's not an easy endeavor to integrate a local inventory feed. Even if you have the physical stores, there's a lot of components that need to come together to make that work. But you'll at least need to be aware of why you might be losing traffic for some of those queries, or at least start the process of thinking about how can we counteract this? What are we actually losing?
Yeah. And it makes the data an absolute pain to analyze, I think, when you've got some stuff showing up in your data, but obviously if you've got your products appearing in those grids for other retailers, that isn't going to show up in your search console, your any of your kind of visibility tracking. I mean, I guess third-party visibility tracking potentially, but it reminds me a little bit of the ways that Search Console can be misleading when you get site links, for example, or you get, it's like suddenly you've got some kind of obscure page getting impressions for branded traffic or branded queries, or the same thing happens with the Twitter integration, I think, doesn't it? Or it used to, where somebody's tweeted a link to a page and that is what's appearing. Anyway, data just all over the place. There's an interesting avenue to go down before we get to the competition here, which is, you mentioned feeds there, and you were talking about it in terms of local inventory feeds, but obviously we shouldn't gloss over the merchant center feed itself, and the fact that this is kind of yet another nail in the coffin of just do things for users. I think merchant feed is 100% purely for the search engine's benefit, like an XML sitemap or robots.txt or whatever. And it's, I think, because of that flip-flopping back and forth where shopping has been at different times 100% organic, 100% paid, or a blend, as it is today, it feels like it's not well owned by SEO teams, and often it's a completely separate beast within many of the folks, many of the organizations we work with. They have to speak to different teams about the merchant center feed. How are you seeing the interplay? So you've essentially got all of the normal SEO type factors, right? So the PDP, the content on that product page, normal content, normal links, kind of pure regular SEO factors. You've got kind of on-page product factors, whether that's like product schema, for example, and you've got this merchant center feed data optimization. How are you seeing the blend of what affects where PDPs appear across the piece, across the regular rankings, these kind of popular product grids, or into regular Google Shopping?
Yeah, I think all of those factors do play a pretty big role. The website content, the product feeds, and the structured data in that order as well, in my experience. Obviously, if you don't have the right content on the page, Merchant Center is going to pick that up when they do their validations and exclude you from appearing. And even at the level of structured data where, for example, a client I was working with, or still working with, they have had an issue where they were updating the site, and within the structured data, the image field somehow got removed from their structured data at scale, and it resulted in invalidation of all their merchant listings across the board.
Ouch.
Yeah, thankfully we got on top of that one pretty quickly, but even the fact that the feeds had all the correct information being funneled in, it still removed all free listing results temporarily just because of that structured data issue. So I do generally like to say that Merchant Center and product feeds are more important than structured data, but you can't have one without the other in a sense.
You can't completely ignore it.
There's just a bit more that you can do with the Merchant Center setup and the kind of insights that you can get. But I think in general, in terms of what are the levers that we can use to improve performance, there are a ton, and pretty much every time I work with a client on this area and I do get into the weeds and look at the setup, I generally learn something new because there's so many different setups about how you can approach this. I think in general, you do need the validation and the checkboxes among Search Console, Merchant Listings Report, and within Merchant Center. Merchant Center will give you a bit more details on why potential visibility is limited or exclusion is enabled across the board. But from there onwards, it really becomes a part of what sort of information do you have on the product page. How does that fit into the competitive landscape? Where does that product sit? And then what sort of attributes do you have to leverage from the product page to bring into the feeds? So I come across situations actually pretty regularly where you'll have, say, a product page where you might have, say, the standard 5 product images, but within the feed itself, there's only one image being pulled through, which is just the feature image. So if you think of that from a logical standpoint, if you only have the one image that can appear within the free listing grids, that's obviously a missed opportunity. And I've found that when you do integrate it at a level where you included all images from the website into the feed, you do get some good results long term there. From there onwards, I think if you say have all the data in place and you're confident that you're checking a lot of boxes, there are certainly a lot of optimization tactics with, say, basic stuff that SEOs know. Titles a pretty good leverage point within product feeds. You do have a few different titles at play when we're talking about PDPs. You've got the H1 on the product page. You've got the title tag that appears in search results. Then you have the product feed title. The product feed title is the one that us as SEOs have a bit more flexibility around what we put in there and allows us to kind of expand our coverage of what Google's understanding of the product is, because you do get situations where the PDP might have all these different variants on there and it's not necessarily set up in a way where those variants are reflected in, say, the H1 or the title tag.
Or even indexable pages at all, actually, right? So that's one of the things that I found most fascinating as we've gone further down this rabbit hole is because these things have started as totally separate systems and classic big company fashion, I'm sure there isn't even a lot of overlap between the engineering side on the search engine side of things. The kind of by definition, the way that you end up with your Merchant Center feed set up in most cases is that you're listing all those variations, and many of those variations will have a single canonical page. And so, for folks who don't have this kind of completely in their head, imagine a product that comes in different sizes, colors, and whatever else. You might have a single indexable product page with drop-down selectors for size and color, for example, and they may all canonical to the one place. They may or may not. I mean, obviously it depends on your e-commerce site setup, but quite often they do, especially sizes, right? You may not have an indexable page for every size of every product, but your Merchant Center feed is likely to have a row for every single variation, every cross, every element that you could have in that matrix. And what that means is that your Merchant Center listings that Merchant Center feed could be 2 orders of magnitude bigger than the number of indexable pages that you have in your product section, and that they a whole chunk of that product feed relates to a single indexable page. And so that's one of the things that I found kind of most fascinating is when you think about how product search works, you often do want a page that isn't a canonical 10 blue links type page, but it does really interesting things to how you think about analytics and how you think about measurement and how you think about impressions and whether the filtering or the sorting or the selection is happening on the Google interface or on your site when you get there.
And there's so many different ways that you can manage that at the PDP level. I've worked with pretty much all different instances of that. If you say use the example of if you've just got the primary canonical product URL, that's the only one that ranks in, it has the ability to appear in search results. You then have other setups where you might have some form of the variants that are indexable and can rank. And then you have some like quasi combined version of that where you are generating these URLs. They do have their, when you click the selector to change your variant, it is generating a different product URL, and then some sites might decide, okay, we want to index those pages, see what comes to it. Other sites are still pointing the canonical back to the primary URL. So all sorts of different setups in there. I do think something that is interesting in this era of how this PDB content is managed is how it can be reflected in these free listing results. And one of the things that I think we spoke about briefly was about how ChatGPT Shopping has introduced their own version of the free listing results. And a big difference that I'm seeing between the two in terms of the actual products that are generated and recommended in the free listing format and provide a link to the PDP is that because we're essentially in Google's ecosystem here, you've got the feeds directing into Merchant Center. It's all kind of designed for Google's network and how they manage that. That in the free listing results, if you've got the exact same product name being referenced in Google search compared to in ChatGPT, the shopping results, within each result on Google, you'll have a drop down that appears in the free listing result, and you can toggle between all the variants of the results. Whereas in ChatGPT, they're just picking up on one of the variants that they've tracked down within that grid result. So it's ultimately not as helpful because they don't have such a direct connection with the source of content, which I think is pretty interesting from a user standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. I think that angle of data access, which you might call, I guess, like depth of inventory or depth of product catalog, is one key competition axis, I think, actually, for these different systems. The other one, which you mentioned earlier, is around things like inventory, but not only inventory, pricing, special offers, all of those kinds of fast-moving pieces of information that I think when we look back over the 20-plus year history of Google, that push to ever more freshness, ever more timeliness, where required, I think, it's one of those axes. That and spam detection are one of those things that I think is coming for all of these other search platforms. And they've realized it, but they're coming from behind. Google has all of this experience of fast, fresh indexing and spam filtering and detection that the LLMs haven't really operated in the adversarial context of, and all the competitive context where these things are changing rapidly. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see how much users end up actually caring about that. Is that truly a differentiator in the market? It does feel like it's made Google search better over the years, the spam detection and the freshness. But is it a moat? Is it differentiating against these upstarts and these incoming systems?
And it really is that quick as well. When you do make a change in Merchant Center for a product page, it is reflected pretty quickly in search results, a lot quicker than waiting for, say, like Google to pick up on a title tag change on the website itself. It has to crawl it, then index it, and who knows.
Which itself is pretty quick.
Yeah.
Compared to retraining an LLM or, those kinds of things. And I think all of these things are interesting as we see the rise of AI, that they are independent of how good the AI itself is. So you could have the smartest underlying AI system in the world, but it still needs that up-to-date knowledge that doesn't come from its training. There's no way of possibly training an AI system to know what the availability or the price or the special offer or the delivery terms are going to be on a particular product on some day, 2 weeks from now, you can only do that with fresh updates, which is a different problem. And it's one that obviously Google has been working on for a long time. So I remain quite bullish on Google in product search, but it is interesting that I think a lot of those kind of up funnel things, whether they're product research or discovery, there's kind of obviously a lot more going on, and we haven't even got to AI mode and Google's own integration of LLM technology into this area.
Yeah, I think something interesting as well. I don't know if you've dug too deep into this for your clients, but even the referrals that you're getting from ChatGPT for some of the really big e-commerce stores, the amount of traffic that goes directly to PDPs is extremely low, and even the amount of sales that come through as a result of that. So it does, I guess users don't seem to be using it in the same way that they might do a Google search for specific products, but it's growing quickly, so who knows?
I actually think AI mode might push the other LLMs more towards that, because you're right. I think there's a lot of things where it might have even been you. Somebody was talking about the surprising amount of referrals that just go to the homepage, for really big sites, even for very specific, queries where you're searching for a particular product, and ChatGPT will tell you, oh, you can get it on this website. But then it's almost the opposite of what we were talking at the top. This idea that Google is increasingly doing all of the sorting and filtering and then sending you to the product. Like ChatGPT's gone the other way and sending you to the homepage. It's entirely your job to find it on the website. I don't think that's sustainable. I think links, and I don't mean this in the SEO sense. I don't mean like links in a PageRank sense. I just mean links in a stuff you can click on that takes you to where you wanted to go to, are kind of cool. I'm a big fan of the hyperlink, and I think all of the LLMs are going to have deeper links in their answers as we go along. And I think we can see this in Google's own evolution, right? The earliest AI overviews didn't really have links in them. Then they started to get more. AI mode is even more link-centric than AI overviews are. And I don't think we're done with that trend yet. My brother Tom has talked about this. He mocked up I quite enjoyed his example of his vision for what AI mode should look like. And he was just working in Gemini, but he was essentially saying that the brief, the system prompt for AI mode should be, convince me to visit this website. So you find the websites that you think I might want to visit and do a sales job for them. You might want to visit this page if you're interested in X, Y, and Z, because this person is the authority on A, B, and C. Sell it to me, convince me to go to the website, which I think is good for users, good for Google, and crucially, better for the ecosystem than Google hoarding all of this zero-click stuff for itself. May still never be as many clicks as a 10 blue link type setup, but anyway, I'm bullish on the hyperlink. Is I guess where I'm coming from there. And you asked about what we're seeing. So our customers, typically very large retailers and e-commerce brands. One of the things that we've been building into our product briefly, not that it's an advert for that, but we've been integrating more data sources. So historically, we ran our experiments primarily on clicks in analytics, and is version A or version B going to get you more organic search traffic? That was our core thing. We obviously do some stuff around conversion rate and conversions as well, but we've also moved the other way into other data sources and higher funnel metrics. So we're running a lot of experiments these days on either Search Console data or Merchant Center, or just starting to run on Merchant Center data. And that opens up the possibility of running experiments on impressions, which is a very interesting one in Merchant Center in particular, because inclusion in that product grid is obviously a leading indicator for performance, for getting the clicks and the sales. And way higher volume, right? Because obviously click-through rates are, whatever they are, 1 or 2%. You've got 100 times as much data on impressions. And so the models that you can fit on that are so much more accurate and sensitive. So we can detect much smaller incremental gains. And so I'm quite excited actually about being able to run experiments that aren't just the down funnel stuff, but are some of those other sources, data sources, metrics as well. So yeah, as we get that up and running, we'll probably be hitting you up for test ideas.
Nice. Yeah. No, I love it. Yeah. I mean, I would love there to be some sort of tracking tool that does a really good job of giving you insights from, say, matching up your Search Console data with the product grid results. At the moment, it's a little bit fiddly to do analysis, but I find the best way to do it is Ahrefs stores all the grid result names in their HTML view of the search result, so you can actually see which products are showing there over time, and you can go back every couple of days and see how much it changes over a period. And for the popular product results, they don't change maybe as much as what people think. They get reshuffled around a lot, but you'll often have, say, 8 different products which frequently show. The difficulty in what I find in Merchant Center is how the impression is recorded for those results, because it's not like a standard web search listing where everything on the first page of search results gets a impression just because the search is done. The user actually needs to click on the result to then see the URL, then the impression is shown. So what happens is, for a lot of these free listing results, your data in Search Console has extremely high click-through rates. It's like,
because they've effectively already done the first click. They've like pre-filtered themselves. Yeah.
Exactly. And some of that does trickle down to other features, like with AI overviews on mobile anyway. The URL isn't shown by default in a lot of instances. It'll just show the favicon at the top. So to get the impression, the user already has to select to show additional information. So I think a lot of that really needs to be kept in mind when you're looking at this data, because if you don't have that insight, then you're thinking, oh, we're doing so well, we're getting 60% click-through rate, and we're getting all this traffic, but that's just how it works. Yeah,
that's of the people who essentially opted in, kind of already.
Exactly. They've already shown interest, so they're probably gonna do another click.
I mean, the whole tracking thing. We're talking mainly about product search here, but the AI mode, AI overview tracking is a complete mess, I think, and I have no idea what that end game is going to end up looking like, because one of the big challenges I think they have is Search Console is very, very much designed for head queries, right? The push for anonymization and privacy means that they strip out a lot of the long tail stuff, the stuff that only one person searches for. But in an AI mode world, Sundar himself has been talking about these paragraph length queries. Now, no 2 paragraph length queries are going to be the same. Even if we're trying to search for the same thing, if I write a paragraph and you write a paragraph, they're going to be different. And it kind of breaks that model. And it's quite easy to think from a user perspective that this is a move away from kind of keywords to paragraph length queries. But from a tracking and data perspective, very much less clear where that goes to. And so I think we're the other interesting thing we're exploring is a more channel agnostic measurement. So just looking at like all clicks to PDPs, maybe rule out a certain stuff, rule out paid, for example. Maybe not though. But seeing that essentially you want to look at the net impact of your changes, whether it's on Google search, all variations, including AI variations and product variations, whether it's product search from ChatGPT or the like, whether it's some of the dark traffic, which actually is an increasing amount of dark traffic is search to your long tail pages, because it's from the ChatGPT app or whatever else it might be. And so I'm kind of increasingly thinking that we're going to be running experiments on net impact on total traffic to PDPs, because even if that is 95% Google, you can't be sure that it's all getting bucketed and tagged and labeled correctly, and so on and so forth. So some interesting product exploration for us there. Yeah. As we kind of come towards the close, I want to kind of make sure we touched on 2 quick final things. One is agentic commerce. And I know that you have done a lot of thinking around this. It obviously ties to the browser side of things, and you know, maybe we get browser wars again for the first time in many years. But this is everything we talked about up to this point is happening right now and is affecting folks right now, particularly the Merchant Center and product grid stuff. This is a bit more forward looking, but what are you seeing coming?
Yeah, I've been tracking some of the AI browsers a little bit recently. I think the first one that was released was Fellow, and then you've got the Comet Perplexity, then you've got OpenAI is working on something which I think is also Chromium based, and then they've introduced their agent function within ChatGPT. I think it's an interesting one. I can definitely see the use case for it, and I think it makes sense in some instances. I don't think the AI browser appeal is something that could really put up a fight against Chrome, in the sense of a large portion of users wanting to ditch Chrome for a lot of these browsers. But I think it's certainly an emerging one, and one which makes the likes of Perplexity and ChatGPT a lot more powerful, because then they can make their own search equivalent the default within their browser, and make it just more difficult for Google to funnel traffic to search and YouTube. So I think it's a logical step for some of these upstarts who want to follow Google's model of owning the portal to then access their own search equivalent. So yeah, I think it's a logical step. Do I think it's going to be competitive with Chrome? Time will tell. I think there's been a little bit of buzz though. So
yeah, I think that's all fair. I actually think that the biggest uncertainty in the browser market is the legal and jurisdictional questions. Does Google get forced to divest Chrome? Are they allowed to continue paying Apple for placement in Safari? That's going to make by far the bigger difference than a startup releasing a new browser, at least in the next couple of years, I think. Final topic was marketplaces, which is an area that I know spend a lot of time thinking about. And incidentally, a lot of the things we talked about here, you've written excellent articles on. So when we post the follow-up and the recording of this conversation and the write-up, we'll link to all that stuff. So folks, if you want to go deeper on any of the stuff that Brodie's been mentioning, most of the talking points here are written up in great detail. So we'll link to all of those. But yeah, so very briefly to round out, what's different when it comes to marketplaces?
Yeah, I think marketplaces are quite an interesting part of the web, because they're congregating a lot of information and products or services from different providers, and bringing it all together to make its own kind of search engine equivalent, where you can search for products available from a lot of different sources. I've been tracking a lot of the big marketplaces, and when I say big marketplaces, I'm less interested in, say, like the eBays, Amazon, say Etsy sites, which don't necessarily follow the rules of what I think marketplaces should follow. There are some really interesting product marketplaces that I keep an eye on, like Reverb, which is actually owned by Etsy, where you can buy and sell used music equipment. Stuff like Swimply, which is like an Airbnb equivalent, where you can rent someone's pool. So there's all these really cool marketplaces out there, which I think do a really good job of providing something to search if they do have a strong inventory. And I think it's one area of search, at least, where across certain categories, say like the informational content segment, you're seeing that really struggle with a lot of the changes that we're seeing on Google with the changing focus, especially with AI. Whereas these marketplaces, they offer something so unique with their relationships that they have with these service providers or products that they're offering, that I think they play quite a crucial component of Google search, and it's an area I think is one to keep a good close eye on.
I think the really key point there is that differentiation, isn't it? If you're talking about a marketplace that is undifferentiated, I don't know, say like a price comparison listing where the listings are all available on other sites, and you're kind of trying to do the same job that Google is trying to do, that's going to be tough to get Google traffic, right? You might get other sources of traffic, and you might have a popular, engaged, loyal user base, but no particular reason to think you should get organic search traffic. Whereas if you're talking about differentiated products, differentiated services, or some kind of value add or wrapper, or it involves the actual ordering, the actual shipping, those things are a bit harder to disambiguate, I think. So, really key, interesting point. And as I say, you've got an in-depth article on that, which we'll link to. But for now, we should probably bring this to a close. There's been really, I found it fascinating. I hope the audience has as well. I'm sure they will have. For folks who want to continue learning from your research and your wanderings around the web, where's the best place to follow you and find your work?
Yeah, I'm active on Twitter and LinkedIn, on my blog, and I've got a monthly newsletter called SERP Alert, where I summarize everything that's happened in Google search results of the month and deliver it to your inbox.
That's a must read. I'm a subscriber, so awesome. Highly recommended. Thank you for the conversation today, and thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, Will.